barges of trash ripping at light speed through the galaxy. What about you, man? What's going on over there?
I have been cutting like 35 onions this morning. So we've been using Instacart. Do you know Instacart? It's like the greatest invention ever.
For grocery delivery?
Yeah, it's just for grocery delivery, but it's like basically given us a whole day of our week back.
Nice.
When you're a student on your own, grocery shopping's easy, but when you have like a family, it's like a 4-hour affair on a Sunday. And so your whole day is basically like gearing up to go to the grocery store, then you go to the grocery store, then you unpack everything, and then your whole day is done. But now you can use Instacart, and it's like the greatest. Except I often just don't read the items very well, so I thought I was buying 3 onions, but I bought 3 packs of like 15 onions or something. So we got like 30 onions delivered, and they've just been sitting on our oven. But we finally started cutting them and making a bunch of pierogies. I had an elaborate fan set up, so I was blasting the onion juice across the onion fumes, like across the room. And then like I was just cutting away and no problems whatsoever. And I look at Helena on the other side of the room. She's weeping because it's just like blasting onion fumes in her face. It was like right in the bathroom where she couldn't escape. So it's just like
she was cornered by the onion fumes.
Yeah, the full force of like 30 onions. But yeah, so that was
talking about getting old. This is what happens on your Sunday. Is this much better than just doing the shopping? Unclear.
Just tears are streaming down her face. Anyway, so that was my morning. I don't know how we're going to transition to the subject for today, but have you been thinking about anything interesting, or should we just jump right into it?
Yeah, this is a weird one, man.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about this one. But I'll go grab a drink and then we'll get freaking into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Welcome to another episode of Increments. I am Vaden Masrani, a senior research scientist in machine learning. And my brother from another mother, Mr. Benjamin Huckleberry Pop Your Cherry Chug. How is that for a middle name? Dude, I was so proud of that one.
Yeah. How long did that take you to come up with?
Like 3 nights of like restless sleep. Yeah.
That's what you were thinking about when you were cutting the onions.
Yeah, dude. Huckleberry Pop Your Cherry. I'm so thrilled by that.
Holy smokes.
From Carnegie Mellon University.
That's a cancelable middle name.
Yeah, with a prime. So we are on Patreon, we're on Twitter, we're on YouTube, we're on Discord. Discord's a secret community, though. We want to prevent the barbarians from flooding the gates. So send us an email about that. Please write us reviews on all the various review platforms. And anything I'm missing at the opening?
No. Oh, what I realized is we perhaps never credited Chesto on the podcast for creating our new logo. I can't remember if we've done that or not, but if we have, then
yes.
Who cares? We can do it twice. And if we haven't, then we should definitely do that. So
yeah,
listeners will notice perhaps that we have a new podcast logo when you open the podcast feed. We've had that for a couple months now, and that's due to Mr. Chesto.
Yeah, shout out to Chesto. Good friend of mine, fellow Vancouverite, fellow History Beers I don't want to say alum because it's still going, but it's very it's on life
tapering.
Support. Yeah, it's tapering. But
it has an off season.
Yeah, it has an off season. Yeah, we used to do this thing for like 10 years almost of just getting together every once a week and having some beers and talking about some subject in history. And so Chesto and I have been doing that for many years, and so that's where we became solid friends. But yeah, thanks to Chesto for all of his help and support, and excellent call for the shout out. So today we are talking about frickin' recycling. Reduce, reuse, recycle. I think you were going to do the opening kind of burst, but the reason we're talking about this, I was trying to remember it, and it's because we actually cut this out of a previous episode. But I think offhandedly, I made a comment that there's 2 things you're not allowed to ever say in public. One is the N-word, and the other is any criticism of recycling, because recycling is seen as just the most good we can possibly do.
Good. Yeah,
an unalloyed good. And
the apotheosis of humankind.
It's just the pinnacle of peak human goodness is Recycling. The 3 R's of recycling. I guess it's the third R. And you know that the 3 R's are in order of effectiveness, like reduce, reuse, recycle, right. And recycle's at the end because it's the least effective of all of those methods. But yeah, so I will throw it over to you to set up the entire subject. But yeah, that's what we're talking about today. So let's go.
Yeah, it was funny. No one criticized recycling, and then Vaden said something about it offhandedly, and I said, "Oh, who has a great post about that? One Mr. Rob Wiblin, which I remember reading 5 years ago or something." And then I remember you saying, "I read the same one." I think that had both clued us into the fact that recycling is perhaps not as optimal as one would expect a priori. And that landfills perhaps aren't as bad as one is often led to believe. But we both realized we had just been carrying around this belief in our heads without ever acknowledging it to each other or in public. And so now is the time to air our grievances against the recycling industry and to see to what extent we agree with Mr. Wiblin and to see to what extent we don't. But for listeners, I'll just say he has a good medium, I think 2018 or 2019 article about recycling and landfills, and basically just making the case that recycling is often not as efficient as you're led to believe, and landfills aren't nearly as bad as you think. And so I think today we're just going to dive into the nitty gritty of some of his points there and see to what extent we agree with him and to what extent we just want to fill Earth with our garbage and bury that shit up and fuck future generations, dude. Hi, listeners. This is Ben from the future. I realized while editing that in a totally epic failure of theory of mind, Vaden and I neglected to introduce who Rob Wiblin actually was. So let me briefly do that here. Rob is the head of research at 80,000 Hours, which is an EA, effective altruism adjacent organization that helps people decide on effective careers. Rob has a website where he's posted a bunch of interesting writing on a variety of topics. We'll put that in the show notes, so be sure to check that out. And now back to past Ben and Vaden arguing about recycling.
So yeah, the title of his piece is What You Think About Landfills and Recycling is Probably Totally Wrong. And after reading this piece, I'm just like so pro dumps now. Like the dumps are the best and recycling is the dumps.
Oh wait, dude, dumps are different than this is gonna get juicy. Dumps are different than landfills. You gotta draw draw a distinction. Yeah.
Okay, good. So I did not make that distinction.
Ladies and gentlemen, someone is perhaps not as researched as they should be. This is a bad sign. We're 2 minutes in.
Yeah.
Oh boy. So I mean, I like very high level, landfills have basically gone through an evolution over time. And they're sort of like any other technology. When we started, we were doing very naive things. So we were just basically we were taking our garbage. We didn't know what to do with it. We were just throwing it in the middle of a field somewhere. And we would just call these dumps. And these had pretty negative consequences, both for soil and would contaminate groundwater. It would release a bunch of methane. And this was a pretty suboptimal solution to the problem of where to put our garbage. And so basically over time, we've learned how to create landfills such that the harm to the environment is very minimal. And we can actually, sometimes landfills have positive aspects because we can use them to generate energy, for instance. And basically the high level is just these have been turned into massive engineering projects. And they're now sort of like feats of human engineering, basically. There's these massive sites. They're very high tech. A lot of innovation and technology has gone into improving them. And so I think part of what we're going to talk about today is just the facts of these landfills and how bad they are, how bad they aren't, et cetera. So that was sort of Rob's main first point. And then his second point was recycling is often not nearly as efficient, both energy-wise and environmentally, as you're often led to believe. A lot of stuff can't be recycled, or the amount of energy it takes to put something through the recycling process is often not worth it. And it's better to just throw it out and create something new from scratch. And different materials are obviously conducive to recycling in different degrees. So I think, we'll talk about that a bit, and we'll go through like different materials, I guess, and how readily each is recycled and how useful that is. And then, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Oh, and then his last point about recycling is that we're often a little overly optimistic in terms of what can be recycled. So there's sort of this confusion, I think, on the public side about exactly what can be recycled. And what this results in is a lot of stuff being sent to the recycling plant. The recycling plant doesn't know what to do with it, because it's just most recycling now is single stream, meaning we just throw everything into the same bin. And then if materials are contaminated or whatnot, the recycling plant often has no choice but to just throw them out. And then so these just end up in the garbage anyway. Oftentimes they end up in the garbage in other countries. So often other countries will buy our recycling, but then if they can't effectively separate like plastics from aluminum and different grades of plastics, etc., then it'll end up being in the trash of countries with much worse environmental practices for actually their landfills. And that's the kind of shit that ends up really polluting the environment and ends up in the ocean.
That was the thing that really changed my view on this, is realizing that a lot of the stuff that you recycle is basically just putting it in a landfill in a developing country on the other side of the world. Rather than landfilling it or incinerating it on your territory, you ship it across the world, and then that happens.
Right.
But so this is great because we both started with Woodlands Peace and then did kind of rabbit holed and researched in different directions. And so I spent a lot of time reading Václav Smil, my go-to source, just about the nature of recycling. So I want to maybe say a few words just to kind of set that subject up, because Woodlands Peace is excellent, but I think you can leave feeling a bit more negative against recycling than you should. And I think that it's very important to split the subject of recycling into a couple of different categories. So let's first maybe dive into the recycling thing. And then second, let's go into the landfill thing. And then maybe third, let's go into how should this information like affect your daily practice of recycling, because that's something I'm still grappling with.
This feels like such a weird subject for us to tackle, I gotta say. I felt like preparing for this episode, I felt like I was on an episode of Stuff You Should Know or something, where we're just going to info dump to people. Yeah, anyway, but I had fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun to just randomly research things. And but I think the reason why it's relevant to the theme of our podcast is it's criticizing a particular idea that's very in the culture that affects your daily life, right? And so that tends to be the stuff that I'm most interested in. Niche philosophical problems like free will, for example, like we talked about last time. I'm really only interested in it because it has direct impacts in our lives. And so I think recycling is kind of in that category. And so that's, at least to me, why that the subject is on theme. But yeah, so Václav Smil makes the point that you basically have to think about recycling in four major categories of material. So the first is metals and aluminum. The second is papers and wood. Third is plastics. And the fourth is e-waste. So metals and aluminums are kind of the gold standard for like what successful recycling looks like. Steel in particular is very amenable to recycling, and it's useful to think about what makes steel so good for recycling as a way to see why plastics and paper are less recyclable. So steel is so easy to recycle because it is perfectly sortable. You can use magnets to sort the steel from the not steel. And when you re-smelt it and melt it down, it retains all of its properties. So it basically doesn't have a finite number of times you can reuse it. Unlike, I guess, aluminum, which does bottom out after you do it a certain number of times, it just becomes too polluted with particular alloys and stuff. When we criticize recycling in this conversation, I think we're mainly going to be criticizing plastics and paper, because aluminum and steel, where countries actually pay people to deliver those goods, that is very effective, and that's not what at least I'm going to be criticizing when I'm criticizing the practice of recycling. It's mainly the plastics and the paper. As I'm speaking, I realize I don't know where glass is on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of glass, looking now at Schellenberger's book, so Schellenberger says that glass is less effective than metals and plastics because of the amount of energy it requires to melt it down and how cheap it is to manufacture it. So glass just basically comes from sand. So glass you may want to recycle for like safety reasons, but in terms of actually being beneficial, it's not that great. And then the area where Smil thinks there's the most room for improvement with recycling is e-wastes. And so I think we'll eventually get to e-wastes. But in terms of framing the conversation, I think the main areas where recycling sucks the worst is plastics and papers.
Let me throw out some numbers and see if you agree with these. So a proponent of recycling would probably say, look, it's about conserving energy, right? If we're reusing materials, inherently, this is going to require less energy than making them anew. And so a natural question is, how much energy are we conserving when we recycle these sort of materials? And what you have to take into account is, of course, it takes energy to recycle because you need to melt things down. It's very rare that recycling process just involves literally using, you get something and you just wash it and reuse it. Arguably, you can sometimes do that. And I believe recycling actually started with people doing this for glass bottles, where companies like old Coke companies would actually just collect glass bottles, wash them basically with like high pressure washers and then recycle them. But that's very rare. Most of the time they're melting them down and then using them either to create the same material over again, which is what you can do with something like steel and asphalt, or more commonly, because melting something down degrades the quality of the material a bit. And often there's some other substances mixed in there just because it was made with other substances. Often it's remade into something that's less pure than the original thing was. So just in terms of numbers, so often there's this number thrown around that recycling aluminum requires 95% less energy than making it from scratch. I did read a bit of the Smil book, and he seems to debunk that and says it's closer to like 74 or 75%. So that's sort of the most efficient thing to recycle. And then it's something like 70% on average for plastics, although the category of plastics is very, very heterogeneous. So it depends on what quality plastic you have. Something like PET, which is plastic bottles, is more. And then lower quality plastic, the stuff that's wrapping around food and stuff, is lower, especially because you have the contamination from food. And then it's something like 60% for steel, 40% for paper, and only 30% for glass, which sort of surprised me. But I guess there's many different kinds of glass out there. So did those numbers roughly?
Yeah, those sound about right. The numbers that stood out for me were the plastic recycling rates. So he has numbers from the European Union, and he says that only 43% of plastic is actually collected for recycling. The rest is landfilled. Of that 43%, 40% of that 43% is still landfilled, and then 30% of that is incinerated. And so when all the dust settles, only about 10% of the plastics that are produced in the European Union are actually recycled. And when you recycle plastic, you have to separate all of the various compounds. And so if you have a load of 10,000, so PET bottles, PET bottles, but those are the soft plastics that you get from NVIDIA. Which is the GPUs.
You buy a GPU. Yeah.
Which is the GPU one, which is the water bottle one.
It's definitely not NVIDIA. That's
okay.
It's definitely
you buy some sparkling spring water. That's PET. But the PVC bottle would be the one you'd get to go hiking, the hard ones.
Right. Yeah.
So if you have 10,000 of the soft ones and you have a single bottle of the hard ones mixed into the load, then the entire batch is ruined. Which is why so much of the plastic recycling just doesn't work very well.
And it's still, a lot of that process is still very manual. So they're hiring a lot of people, and that's that can't be the funnest job, I would imagine. So one thing you said that I thought Smil's book, I was a little confused what he was trying to get at here. So Smil spends a lot of time talking about how bad we are at recycling, and there's very low recycling rates. This either comes from the fact that people are perhaps bad at sorting their recycling, but also comes from the fact that, often, even if people sort the recycling, most recycling plants are now actually single stream recycling, and they just put everything together and then try and sort it after the fact. But I thought it's a weird, and I couldn't quite tell if you were making this argument, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a weird argument to make, to say because we're bad at recycling, we shouldn't recycle. So if you say, we only 10% of our plastic or whatever gets recycled, I don't see that as an argument on its own to say that plastic recycling is bad, right? That just might mean, we need to get better at figuring out how to sort plastics, or have a public campaign around better messaging around recycling and stuff like that, right? So, were you making that argument or no?
No. So thank you for making that clarification. So first, I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same Smil book, because I think he's talked about this in a number of different books. So the one that I'm citing is Making the Modern World, Materials and Dematerialization. Is that the one that you are thinking about as well? When he talks about how we're bad at recycling, I think he's talking about that in general across the 4 categories. And in particular, he focuses in a lot on the e-waste component. And he talks about this famous recycling center in Guyyu, China. I don't know if you saw that.
No.
So Guiyu. This is a place where there's a whole village that's been dedicated to manually recycle your phones and your computers and your laptops and all that. I think the average rate of lead poisoning is something like 80% in the kids, and And so when Smil talks about needing to improve our ability to recycle, I think he's talking about areas of recycling where if it's done well, then it actually has big benefits, or conversely, something needs to happen with this garbage. And because there's enough valuable minerals inside it, people are going to do it inevitably anyways. So we need to improve the ways that it's done so that it's safer. I don't know what he's said about plastics in particular, because he hasn't done a comparison between landfills and plastic recycling. But there, I think the answer is incineration and waste to energy facilities in particular, just because of how cheap it is to make this plastic, how plastic is an inevitable byproduct of using fossil fuels anyways. So something has to be done with the material. And if we can recover a lot of the energy afterwards, then that seems to me to be the best solution.
Okay, nice. Yeah. So let's just talk about incineration for a second. So when I first read about the incineration of plastic and how that can be used to produce energy, that surprised me at first, because when I think about burning plastic, I typically associate it with like people burning plastic in the third world. So if people have been to Africa or Southeast Asia, et cetera, you'll know that a common practice, especially in villages there where they don't have the infrastructure to have garbage trucks and coordinated landfills, et cetera, is for villagers to just collect their garbage at the end of the month or the year and then burn it. And people doing this individually has pretty bad externalities. It just creates air pollution. And this was a big problem, for instance, in like India as it was developing, as you had like millions of people burning their own trash, and then you have plastic particulates in the air, and these are carcinogens, and it creates bad air pollution, etc. So when I first heard about burning plastic, I was like, what the fuck? Is this possible? But then I realized, of course, plastics are made out of oil, right? They're essentially like crude, like burning plastics is essentially like burning crude oils. And so when it's done in a nice, controlled, ventilated space, it's sort of unsurprising that you can burn these and pretty efficiently get energy from it. And so I'll link to a nice little YouTube video of a Bloomberg investigative reporter who was curious what Tesco, which is a big supermarket in the UK, was doing with all its soft plastics recycling. So they went through a period where they were like telling people to recycle all their, like those soft plastic bags that you'll put meat and food in and stuff. And the moral of the story is, this got sort of shipped across the channel, ended up in Poland. And most of it doesn't actually end up being recycled. Some small percentage of the purest stuff gets recycled into like garbage bags and stuff like that. The majority of it just ends up being burned. But this is actually a great thing, because there's like a small city in Poland that's mostly powered by buying the world's plastic.
Oh, really?
Burning it. Yeah. It's fucking
that's awesome. Yeah.
And so why do I bring this up? Two, just to point out the perhaps surprising fact that plastic can be efficiently burned. But also second, to say that just throwing, so this is why I'm sort of ambivalent about putting plastic in a landfill, because then it's not going to end up producing energy, right? Unless exactly. That landfill is we can talk about that later. Some landfills are able to generate energy from the methane, but in terms of the plastics, it's much more efficient to just burn them. And so I think instead of pushing for recycling of all plastics or just throwing them in the landfill, maybe we should just have dedicated programs to like burn this shit. And then hopefully we don't have to ship it all the way to Poland for this to happen. Hopefully other countries will just sort of take this on board.
Yeah. Or we could start a cultural practice of backyard tire fires.
Fucking burn.
Dude, just like having a birthday tire fire. How good would that be?
I'm creating energy. Let's build, baby. Let's build.
Yeah. To the stars. But so I would encourage listeners to Google waste to energy plants and just read about how safe they are, how environmentally safe they are, how much tech has gone into like scrubbers. And I think I read one quote. This comes from the New York Times, that the plants run so cleanly that many times more dioxins are now released from home fireplaces and backyard barbecues than from incineration.
Yeah, nice.
So again, it sounds bad burning plastic, but it's actually much more effective than shipping it across the world and then having it be burned in open air.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so one of the final points I want to make about recycling is sort of a heuristic that I've started to develop when thinking about this subject. And that's to look at whether the pressure to recycle is coming from economic incentives or coming from top-down environmental regulation. And so I think this typically tracks nearly perfectly whether something's going to be efficient or not, which there's good reason for it too. So So the earliest instances of recycling are like exactly what you'd expect. It was sort of during wartime, and companies found that by encouraging people to recycle and then paying them a bit to get certain products and materials back, they could reduce costs, right? And so it started because companies were like, yeah, we'll buy back bottles and cans and stuff from you, because they were just finding that to be more cost effective. And so in that sense, recycling is an extremely natural thought, right? It's like, we have all this material out there, let's just reuse it. And you can trust that if companies are doing this, then it's going to be cost effective for them, meaning that it's going to be energy efficient, right? Because these are the people that are actually bearing the cost at the end of the day. And so that's sort of one side of recycling. Companies, or sometimes countries, like what I just mentioned with respect to Poland, right? They're literally buying soft plastics from places like Tesco because they're realizing they could use it to their advantage. And so when the underlying incentive is economic like this, then I basically trust the process to be efficient. And similarly, I think this sort of logic holds for when, so China doesn't buy a lot of the world's garbage or recycling anymore, but it went through a period when it was trying to industrialize where it did, just because it needed as many raw materials as possible. And it would just melt everything down and then use it to try and jumpstart all their industries, basically. Now they have enough people and enough industry that they don't need to do that anymore. And so they've stopped buying the rest of the world's garbage. But that process as well, while they were doing it, I also trust that to be efficient, because they're doing it of their own accord. And if they're paying money to do it, presumably they're getting bang for their buck there, right? They're not going to do it just to save the rest of the world their garbage. But then there's the kind of recycling that is regulated, meaning governments, state, local, or whatever, are doing it for like green reasons. So they're thinking either there's a public campaign and people are like, okay, we need to start recycling to save the planet. And then often that sort of percolates upwards and becomes regulation of some sort, right? And then that's when I get more, not to say that it might be good for other reasons, but then there's automatic reason to distrust if that's actually going to be effective or not.
You're not living in Canada anymore, where we have to all fucking use paper soggy straws.
Do you really still? I thought that stopped.
No. So Trudeau has part of the Liberal platform to get to zero plastic waste by 2030. And he's starting by getting rid of plastic bags and plastic straws.
Well, that'll do it.
Which is the stupidest fucking policy I've ever heard in my life. And all it's doing is causing people to buy like aluminum straws or cut down more trees to make these paper straws. And in particular, in the case of the plastic bags, it's very well known now that you have to reuse a cloth bag something like 173 times to make it worth the extra energy that's gone into a cloth bag compares to a plastic bag. But I can speak for myself and presumably other people, when I look at my closet, it's just filled now with these
because you forget them. You forget them, and then you have to buy them at the store.
And I'm buying so many of these. They're everywhere in my house now, and I've tried to remember them. Of course I do, but you just forget, and you have to buy another one. And who amongst our listeners has used a cloth bag 173 times? Like no one. And so it just goes to show that these policies that people think are going to make the world better, they're just doing it for the feels, and they haven't actually looked into, is this energy efficient or not? And if it's not, then these top-down regulations, at least in the environmental case and in many other cases too, just don't work. They just don't work very well. And so that's why I think your heuristic of if it's an economic incentive, if it's bottom-up or if it's top-down, I think that makes perfect sense.
Ironically, I think a piece of legislation that could actually be useful is legislation that says you can't say that something is recyclable unless there is a clear way it can be recycled. So one problem is that because recycling is so culturally popular, often companies will just put recycling logos on various kinds of plastics and cardboard that actually it's very difficult to recycle them, and it's a nightmare. But there's no reason they can't put that logo on it, right? And then it makes people more keen to buy their products or whatever, because they're like, I can recycle this. Yeah, it's one of those situations where the actual any useful regulation is reliably not being implemented, and it's just all like this useless token regulation that is, and it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't have too much more about recycling. Some stuff might hit me as we're talking later, but should we move on to landfills? How you feeling?
Yeah. So let's just return for a second to Wiblin's piece. So I encourage everyone to read it. And basically, he just goes through a number of common objections to this seemingly contrarian point that landfills are better than recycling. And so let's definitely go to the landfills subject, and let's kind of try to touch on a good number of his points, because I thought that they were just excellent.
Yeah. So I think maybe we've convinced you that recycling is not as energy efficient as it should be, or at least the process is more complicated, etc. Presumably you're sitting there thinking, well, so what? What's the alternative? We only have so much space on this planet, and recycling is, even if it's perhaps not energy efficient, it surely is resource efficient in terms of, or maybe space efficient is a better way to say it, right? Like we can't just throw everything out and make new ones. We got to try and reuse materials because A, we only have so many materials, and B, we only have so many places where we can throw out old materials. Yeah, well,
if I could be a little bit pedantic, let's separate out reusing from recycling, because reusing is, say, using a glass bottle and washing it and then using it again, but not disassembling it and reassembling it. And so obviously I know what you meant, but just to say that we're not against people reusing material, reusing stuff and multiple times.
No, I am. Fuck it. Throw it out. Use it once. Use that thermos one time and buy another one.
Use it, abuse it, and refuse to reuse it.
We're trying to drive economic growth here, people. You can't be reusing the same water bottle over and over agaeen.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're right. I shouldn't be conflating the last 2 hours here. I'm gonna get shafted.
Just the green, please. Yeah. Oh man, we've already pissed off so many people with our previous episode on free will.
No one liked that, because I think even the people who are pro free will were like, why are you arguing about this? And then because they're using their freedom to ignore us. And all the anti-free will people are already convinced and so they just want you to shut up. And there's no winning. There's no winning talking about free will. That's what I've learned. Which is why I mostly just let you and Lucas argue about it. I tried not to say too much.
Yeah, well, I've learned that Deutsche and Popperians just will not budge on the free will subject, but gives me more people to argue with, so I'm always having a good time doing that. But anyways, sorry. Back to
okay. So let's so as a second pronged attack on your cherished belief, dear listener, let us attack the notion that landfills are actually bad. And a big part of this is basically just what I was saying at the beginning. So early sort of dumps, as I'm going to call them, were bad, but like in anything, we made progress and we sort of learned our lessons about how to manage our waste much more effectively. And so now landfills are these huge engineering projects where they're often like tens of square kilometers. They're these super landfills, and we line. I guess one thing to say is a landfill is not trying to create a space where things get reabsorbed back into the earth. That's sort of like what early dumps maybe we're doing. We're like, we'll put it there. Hopefully it degrades eventually and we can just forget about it. Now we recognize like, that process is just going to take too long. So now what landfills actually are basically just trying to create pockets in the earth where we can just dump stuff and it's actually protected from the surrounding earth. So we basically dig a bunch of land up. Maybe we dig underground a bit. We line the area with these like 2-inch plastic polymers that basically just serve to protect the surrounding earth from the garbage.
Landfill liners. Yeah.
Landfill liners. Yeah. What happens in dumps is they get moist, as you can imagine, either from natural rain or just because garbage is not the driest thing, as I'm sure you know. And so what happens is the water will leak out from the garbage. And then if there's no protection, it'll leak into the groundwater. And people also often call this like leachate, I think.
Yeah. I was actually wondering how you pronounce that. I was saying leachate in my head.
Leachate. It might be leachate. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. Leachate.
But this is basically just water funneled through trash. Delicious.
Oh, sounds great. Yeah.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah.
And so if that's not properly taken care of course, that's going to cause some environmental erosion and contaminate groundwater and stuff. But so we're basically trying to protect the surrounding area from that. Yeah. So, and then trucks come and dump a bunch of trash in a landfill every day. And then we have these giant bulldozing machines, basically compactors, that drive back and forth, flatten it out. Yeah. Like they're very careful about the exact shape. So you don't want it to be completely flat. Actually, you want it to be like a bit of a mound. And so you like building a pyramid, right? You have you carve out a huge space, and then you slowly create this basically mountain of trash and compactify it, and you can hold a lot of garbage in there.
Yeah, but then once it's full, if it's a well-run landfill, then you compact it enough, and then you can put layers and layers of topsoil on top of it, and actually turn it into like a park or something.
Yeah, or build stadiums on it. There are certain stadiums. Calgary, where we're both from, had built a ski hill on top of their landfill. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
dude,
I didn't know that at all. That's amazing.
Oh no, I'm forgetting what the actual name.
Yeah,
COP. Yeah, that's built on a landfill.
Oh no way. Okay, sweet. Yeah, that's a great thing to know.
Talk about stuff to bring up at bars. Yeah,
yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, and so nothing to add there. But that's maybe on the point that landfills are bad for the environment. Well, the answer is once upon a time, yes, they were, but now, if they're properly run, no, they're not. And so I had this wild idea that, since we're just talking about landfills, just tell me what you think about this. Like, so instead of the Trudeau government and saying we're going to spend like $2 billion to eliminate all plastic waste, imagine if it spent $2 billion to build properly run landfills in developing countries.
Yeah.
If like the global mission was to try to improve the world's landfills globally. I think that one reason this could sell is that you could frame it like repenting for the sins of colonialism, that we have to go and just like clean up the garbage of these developing countries and try to make it seem as if it's like this penance. Is that the right word? Penance?
Yeah.
And like, what developing country would say no to having better trash management systems, like in I forgot actually where the worst places are. I think like
Philippines and stuff.
Yeah, the Philippines and stuff. Yeah. So the same amount of money could go so much further if we were to just try to improve the world's landfills rather than trying to do this obscene recycling business.
Yeah.
And so I was just
you'd create like engineering jobs and all this stuff, because they're like technological marvels, basically, these things. So you'd create jobs there. Yeah.
Yeah, and it would like improve the local region in terms of like health, and potentially reclaim beaches, and then improve maybe even like tourism and stuff, because if you have garbage everywhere and bad air pollution, then no one's going to want to travel to your country. But if it's clean, then you could start like it's like almost like the broken windows theory of governance or whatever, of like garbage. So I just feel like if as a society we stopped just following whatever makes us feel good, like that has green trees on it, and just look at actual data and figure out what actually works well, and then do more of the things that work. Like the effective altruists would just...
Dude, I was just going to say, you just invented...
Yes. Come on, effective altruists. Take this and run with it. Come on, start making blog posts about, like, so Rob Wilbin's an effective altruist.
Yeah, I mean, we should give them credit where credit's due, right?
Yeah,
honestly, I think they are pretty good about pointing stuff like this out.
If there's any EA people listening, like, who's the boy and slat? We should have like a boy and slat of like landfills. Just make it sexy and like put them on some podcasts, or like the nuclear influencer Isabella
Bomeke.
Yeah, Bomeke, except have one for just garbage and landfills.
Yeah.
Again,
you're gonna have to be really sexy to sell that shit. Yeah, so you're gonna have to overcome a lot of hate on that one.
Yeah. But I anyway, so that was my wild idea of making $2 billion.
That's gonna be a PR nightmare, I gotta say. I don't have high hopes for that project, but Godspeed to whoever takes it on. Yeah. So I mentioned how some landfills can actually create energy. I just want to briefly discuss how that works.
Yeah.
So when things biodegrade, or just like, when they're degrading in general, they're creating methane gas typically. And so what you can do is just dig wells in these mountains of trash, basically, that's used to siphon off the methane gas coming from the landfill. And then you basically just purify it and then use it to spin turbines, which produce energy. And this is like a relatively simple process. We know how to do this. There's a huge landfill, the Apex landfill in Las Vegas. And this is used to power 1 million homes in Las Vegas. And so you could also just do that for developing countries, right?
Oh, that's fantastic.
And so it's a pretty straightforward process to do this. And so that's also pretty cool. Next thing we should maybe talk about is space. So we've made the case that, a well-run landfill is actually not that bad for the environment, can produce energy, etc. But an obvious objection is, well, these things are huge and there's a lot of people in the world and we're producing a lot of garbage. We can't just do this indefinitely. Like, how we must be running out of space. And indeed, if you Google how much space is there for landfills in the US, you are bombarded by articles that say, often very precisely, and I spent a long time trying to figure out where this number will come from. Yeah. Often they'll say 62 years. They say we have 62 years left. And I think there was a bunch of articles Yeah, 62 years left. And so I did spend some time trying to figure out where they get this, because it all must be a single source, right? There's no way they're all just randomly converged on 62 years. Where are they getting this from? And yeah, so there was this article / website thing that I'll put in the show notes that came out that basically made the argument that many states are running out of landfills. Some still have a decent amount of space, but they'll be out in like 30 to 50 years. And some states like New York are going to be out of space in about 10 years, et cetera. And altogether, we have about 62 years of space left. The absolute bait and switch that is played in these articles when you dig into exactly how this is being calculated is they assume we're not going to create any more landfills. So they'll do something like, or they'll say at current rates, and not, assuming.
So they keep the number of landfills fixed, and then they just forecast out the growing garbage and how long. Well, that's actually wild that if we need no more landfills, we would have 62 years worth. Yeah,
it's still impressive. Right?
That's a huge number of years.
And then some other articles will make minor concessions to building landfills, but say, at the rates we're building, we'll still run out of space, et cetera. Yeah. Never thinking that, well, if push came to shove, presumably we could build faster, right? And so that's a huge bait and switch. It's not proof in the other direction, right? It doesn't tell you we definitely have enough land, and like how many landfills are there? How much space do we actually have? How much space do we need? How long can we continue to do this? And those are all legitimate questions that I actually had an extremely hard time answering. And I ended up just doing my own napkin math. So first, I'd like to hear if you had some more reliable sources about like space constraints and things like that.
No, the depth to which I thought about that, I thought, honestly, there's got to be so much space that I don't even need to calculate it. Like how much space is there in Canada? I don't even know how, like if I was to draw a circle on a map, how big that circle would be for landfills. But there's space everywhere. So I didn't even do any math. But I'm sure you've thought about it much more carefully than... Because it'd have to be somewhere, it'd have to be close to cities. Okay, so you can't just put it in the middle of Siberia.
Well, I mean, you could, but then you have to, it's going to take a lot of energy getting it out there, et cetera.
So, and then it would have to be not in like a residential area. And so doing actually thinking about it more seriously, I didn't do that. So I would love to hear your napkin math. But it's still it strikes me as just like, of course we have enough space. And if we don't, just like dig deeper. Can't you just dig deeper? Isn't that... Can't you just go in the Z direction rather than the Y direction?
Well, my thought was like, can't you just start shooting it into space? Like, why can't we? What's the term for when one civilization? Oh, it's panspermia, right?
I've never heard of this. Wait,
panspermia is, I think, when one civilization seeds life on other planets, and there's hypotheses that Earth actually was the result of panspermia.
Oh, isn't that like the like DNA was on a meteor or something?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But anyway, why don't we just fill up the life with universe by shooting our garbage with all our microbes onto other planets? I'm all for it.
Oh my God! Just like cosmic ejaculation.
Barges of trash ripping at light speed through the galaxy. Intercepted by another civilization. They're like, what the fuck is this?
Where the fuck is Musk? Why isn't he on this right now? And I think it's a fantastic idea. Yeah.
That's funny because I think a lot of people actually have different intuitions about the space. And I admit I'm somewhere in between. So yeah, I have this sense that Earth is massive and often we overestimate how much of an impact we have on it. But still, isn't there part of you that's like, okay, there's a lot of people on the Earth and we're all producing a decent amount of trash. Like, isn't space seems to be somewhat of a concern here, right?
No, but there's very much a zero-sum nature to it, right? Because the trash that we're making comes out of the Earth. So if we're digging up a bunch of holes to get, say, fossil fuels to turn into plastic, then
just stuff those suckers
back into the holes that we've just dug. So like obviously
from whence you came.
Yeah, like obviously I know that there's it's half a facetious point and half a serious point. So the facetious side of it is that obviously if an area for digging fossil fuels is set up for like fossil fuel refinement and manufacturing, then you can't just put a dump there. So that's the facetious part. But the serious part is like in the limit, the same amount of matter is moving in the earth and out of the earth again, right? So with it's like the carbon cycle.
Because that's the thing, they're sheltered off, right? Like they're not becoming, in terms of space, I guess I agree with you, but it's not zero sum in that these are supposed to be like completely separated from the environment around them.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of like the actual like manufacturing that's required to separate out the landfills, and then it's not feasible. But because just like we're making holes in the earth to take out the resources, and then we eventually need to put the resources back in at that very high level, I'm not worried about space. But then when you make it more concrete about like where is it going to go and how close to cities and stuff, then maybe it's a bit more challenging. But I'm not so worried that I felt even the need to do napkin math, but I would love to hear what your napkin math.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it's not super sophisticated, but for those like me who were just extremely, if you just Google, are we running out of landfill space, or like how much space are landfills taking up? You're just bombarded with things saying like, we have no time left, we're screwed. And so, okay, so here's my landfill math. So there's the biggest landfill in the world is the Apex landfill in Las Vegas. And it's currently 9 kilometers
because they have
squared.
The most amount of filth to dispose of.
All those people with gambling debts, dude, when you kill them in the bottom of the casino, you got to be able to put them somewhere, right?
Yeah, it's like 90% condoms and torn up marriage certificates. And hair pieces and neon lights.
Okay, so this thing has been running for about 50 years, a little less than that, and their rates, their forecasts are that at current rates, this could sustain Las Vegas for another 300 years or 250 years.
Without digging any more holes, just a single.
Yeah, so with expanding the base a bit, but basically that landfill can handle trash at current rates for, let's say, a total of 300 years, awesome. 250 years in the future, and it's been about 50 years old. Now, it's unclear what current rates mean. I don't know if they're taking into account that Las Vegas will probably grow as a city. It's about 700,000 people. I'm not sure if it'll get bigger, but let's just stay on the conservative side and say suppose they're assuming no population growth. Okay. Now, it's currently 9 kilometers, the base of it's 9 kilometers squared. And remember, they sort of like build up in a mound, right? So right now it's like, it's 500 feet high, I think, or something, and it'll just get higher. And they said they might have plans to like expand the base a little more. So I said, okay, screw it. Suppose they more than doubled the base. So suppose they went to 20 kilometers squared. Okay. So now we have this landfill. It's 20 kilometers squared, can take trash for 700,000 people for 300 years. So that's 28.5 meters squared per person for 300 years. Okay. Now the US, so I just did this for the US, and we can extrapolate to the world. But so the US is, I think, currently about 330 million people. Let's just round it up, again, being conservative, to 400 million people. So for 400 million people, 28.5 meters squared per person for 300 years. That's 12,000 kilometers squared. So to summarize, so that's 12,000 kilometers squared we'll need for 400 million people for a 300-year period. So,
okay, question. So just to summarize, I'm following so far. So you're using Las Vegas, which is the dirtiest city in the States. I have no idea.
I don't know,
if that's true or not. Yeah. And you get an estimate of the amount of square kilometer per person for 300 years. And then you multiply that by the number of people, say 400 million. And then you arrive at, what was the number again?
12,000 kilometers squared.
12,000 kilometers squared. And what's the US kilometers squared?
Yeah, so that's the thing. So the US is 10 million kilometers squared. So 12,000 kilometers squared is 0.012% of the land mass of the US. Okay. So now let's assume that even 50% of the US is, this is definitely not true, but assume 50% is like territory we don't want to mess with. So either cities or national parks or sensitive ecological areas, whatever, say 50%. That's still, you just double and that just doubles the earlier percentage. So now if we only have half of the US, that's 0.024% of that we've taken up with landfills. Like, yeah, we have a lot of fucking space. I think we're good to go. And like you said, I mean, ideally they're close enough to cities that it doesn't take obscene transportation costs to get our trash there. But yeah, obviously, if push comes to shove, we're going to figure out how to build landfills farther away and transport our trash there. Like that's not what's going to be to stop civilization in its tracks.
Yeah, and it just takes like a single road and a destination, right?
And we got it.
It's not like trying to cover the world in solar panels where you need to figure out like where to put all the battery stations and
exactly.
Because the further away the electricity generation stations are, the more you lose for resistance and transportation costs when you're shipping it. But that's not the case with landfills. You just put them far away and just build a road and make a lot of trucks. Yeah, nice.
So that was probably hard to follow. I'll just put the math in the show notes for those who are curious. This is very basic numbers, but just to get I think that's a decent ballpark estimate. And this is based on the reason I based it on the Apex landfills, because this is sort of state of the art landfills, which I'm assuming going forward we're going to be building good landfills. And the US is even denser than Canada, right, in terms of people and places where you can and can't build. So if you think of northern Canada, my God, we got a lot of room up there, dude. So we could build a lot of landfills. So I'm definitely not worried about space for the foreseeable future. So also I wondered if there was I wondered when you were reading this, what your sort of Deutschian brain thought about all of this. Because there's definitely part of me that respects the push to recycle from purely like a technologically optimistic point of view. Burying everything just because we can't quite figure out what to do with it, or we're not efficient enough at sorting it, we haven't figured out the processes required to turn it into something else. It's like pessimistic in some sense. Like part of me is all for the push to create technologies that would just automate the shit out of the recycling process, such that we can just have trash and recycling in one. Like, so, you know, Deutsch's big thing is anything that's not prohibited by the laws of physics is possible. Presumably, we could have a system like the following: trash, recycling, everything just goes into the same bin. That bin goes through a processing plant. The processing plant could be this crazy state-of-the-art facility that sorts different kinds of plastics, different kinds of woods, metals, etc., into the respective bins. You'd use magnets, you'd use density scales, you'd use all this fancy equipment. Presumably, like, there's got to be a way. Maybe we can't do it right now, but presumably there's a way to do this. And there's got to be ways to like purify materials and then reuse them in new materials. Like part of me is like, I respect the recycling project just because, in some sense, like it's an optimistic technological gander about what we can achieve with materials, right? Like there is something to me about just like fuck it, we'll just bury it all, and like for the next 10,000 years, like at some point we're gonna have to figure out what to do with it, right?
No, but that is figuring out what to. So if we bury it and build parks and ski hills on top of it, then that's
we're all gonna
amazing.
be really good skiers.
I guess I'm not starting with the idea that burying it is bad. I think that burying it, because we've developed technology that allows it to be buried completely safely and energy to be reclaimed from it. And I'm assuming that stuff that's going to a landfill is the stuff that cannot be recycled effectively or efficiently. But I wouldn't want like
currently.
I wouldn't want steel and asphalt and glass that can be just reused or just good working products. I wouldn't want any of that to be landfilled, right? So the stuff that is going into landfill, I'm almost defining as the stuff which can't be effectively recycled.
I think that's false. Because the whole part of the problem is that it's really hard to sort this stuff. And so a lot of it is like, it could be useful on its own, but it's hard to separate it out. And it's just more economically feasible for these recycling plants to just, we're just going to throw this out because it's a bunch of things mixed together.
So if it can't be sorted effectively, then I consider that to be not recyclable. But I don't see that as pessimistic. I see that as just, it doesn't work. And so why should we try to force it to work because we want to feel good about it, you know?
Well, it's because it's useful materials that we're getting rid of, right? These are going to be very hard to use in the future.
It's useful materials which are produced in abundance that we're not running out of. Like if we were running out of plastic, then yeah, we would recycle it. But plastic is a byproduct of stuff we need anyways with fossil fuels. And so it's in abundance. And so it's just easier to turn discarded plastic into energy than it is to try to turn it back into a new bottle again, right? Like that is recycling it in some sense. It's turning it into energy, which is recycling.
My point is that I don't want to encourage an attitude that says, let's just landfill everything and forget about making any technological progress on the recycling front. Like, I think it's great that we figured out how to do some recycling, and we should keep trying to engineer our way into be able to using more and more materials, because that's a great thing.
But if landfilling things doesn't have any negative consequences, why are you opposed to landfilling stuff?
Well, no. So it does in the limit for sure, right? So
No,
like, at some point,
in the point in the limit, we have plenty of space, and in the limit, you're gonna have, like, what does it actually even mean to say in the limit? We have made these things that you can put ski hills on top of and don't hurt the environment.
Well, there's not an infinite amount of oil, right? So at some point, we're gonna have to, for instance,
we're not talking about like peak oil. Like, the peak oil thing is completely
well, it's
vacuous. Yeah.
Well, oh no. Well, obviously not. It's not vacuous in the sense that like there is a finite amount of oil. Like, what is vacuous is like all the prophesying that's been done around peak oil, right?
No, it's not a finite amount of oil in the sense that you're thinking of. Like, that's like Alex Epstein made the example of, like, it's not like you put a straw into a cup and then eventually the straw just starts to get empty and you go and it's done. It's that the oil becomes harder to reclaim, and thus people kind of stop trying to recover it. But if there was a shortage, it'll become more economically viable, and then we would recover more of it, right? And so it's not finite in the sense of like, and we're out of it now. It's that there's this delicate dance between the availability of it and the cost of production and the value of extraction. And so as the economic forces change, then more is extracted, and we're continuously discovering new pockets of oil. So I honestly think that peak oil is not something we need to think about really at all.
Well, I mean, so yeah, the pricing mechanism there, what it incentivizes to use it in more efficient ways, or for instance, to move on to other materials. But clearly there's a finite amount of oil because the earth is a finite size. And I'm unclear physically what you're trying to argue here.
That the finite is so far away that we don't need to base any decisions on it right now. It's not something that we need to worry about at all, and it shouldn't factor into our discussions or thoughts about whether or not landfills are a good or bad thing. Because if we ran out of it, like if we literally ran out of it, then we would just start digging up the landfills and start recycling at that point, right? It would all still be there, and so we would just dig them up.
But we'd have to develop that technology of like how to recycle, and that's my point. Like, I want that technology to be developed, and people that are working on that, I think that's awesome. Like, I don't possibly understand how you're against this right now. This seems like the most bizarre side of an argument to take. Like, who could be against technological progress and figuring out how to use more materials so we can have more abundance? That's such a bizarre thing to argue against.
No, what's bizarre is to try to get rid of landfills if landfills
I literally never said that. I'm the one who just made all the arguments pro landfill. Like, I'm shocked at what you're trying to argue right now.
No, I'm not trying to argue anything. I'm just saying that you started the subject by saying that it would be such a shame if we just buried our garbage in landfills. And I'm challenging that, because why would it be a shame?
No, I never said that. I said if we did that and we never developed, like, we didn't pursue new technologies to be able to like do cooler things with that material.
Yeah, but the new technology, like, why not?
Like, we'll have to develop that stuff at some point.
Why not make the new tech? Like, why not put it into making better landfills? It's like trying to get something to work that doesn't necessarily need to work, and we already have a solution that works better. And so it's unclear why we want to invest a lot of time and energy into figuring out maximally efficient ways to sort plastics when we could just bury it and it's just easier and there's no problems with doing that. Is my question. Like, why would we need to invest hundreds of thousands of man hours into trying to figure out a better way to recycle when the existing solution is completely fine? This may be my point.
Well, so I'm confused about, like, so at some point we have to develop new technologies to be able to figure out how to use new materials in new ways. That's just how progress works. And so are you anti-developing those technologies? Like, I'm confused about what sort of take
no,
you're
so I think
here.
in particular, I think we need to figure out better ways to recycle e-waste. I think that's a huge area that we haven't talked too much about because it's so dangerous to actually do this recycling that we need to figure out better ways to do that. The thing that I'm not totally on board with is trying to figure out better ways to, say, recycle soft plastics when we have a good solution already, which is burn the motherfuckers and use the energy. And so, like, you started by saying it would just be so sad and such a depressing outlook if all we had to do, or all we could ever do, is burn it and bury it. And I'm just saying, like, why is that sad or depressing at all? Like that.
All right, I'm just gonna. The audience can decide if that's what I was saying or not, or yeah.
We'll have to listen back. Maybe I misheard. But like, yeah, I'm for technological progress, but that often means that we stop working on things that aren't gonna get us anything. And if we already have a great solution, then let's just use that solution. That's where I'm coming from. But yeah, you're right. Let's let the audience decide. So. Okay, I had only one or two more points to make, but that's going to take us a little bit away from what we're currently talking about. So are there anything left on your side?
No, you wasted up.
So I just want to know how this is going to affect your daily life. That's the thing I'm still wrestling with. And so I still fucking recycle, and I still put my plastics in the plastic recycling bin, but I feel a little silly every time I do it. And I'm grappling with a cognitive dissonance, and I want to see if you think this is like a fair analogy or something. It would be like if the government builds in your personal backyard like $100,000 very expensive expert recycling machine that takes in like individual plastic bags and individual plastic straws and disposes of them very effectively. And it's like before they put this machine in, we could perhaps object and we could say, well, this is not a valuable use of money. We could do so many more things with this, and why don't we just do XYZ? But then after it's in, once it's been made, is it good to protest and not use it, or should we just use the machine? And that's kind of where I'm at with the recycling thing. It's like now that the infrastructure has been set up, whether or not it's a waste is almost like irrelevant because it's been made. Now is it better to still take our plastics and recycle it through this stream, even though we know that only 10% of it's going to go actually get recycled, and it's probably better to landfill it anyways? Like that's where I'm kind of stuck. Is that a dumb place to be cognitive dissonance wise?
No, I don't think that's a dumb place, but I think you can resolve it by just looking at in your area. Typically you can actually see what is commonly recycled and what's not. And so you can look at just like where the recycling for like your building or your neighborhood, you can figure out like where that goes and what sort of recycling they actually want. And then I think my solution would be like, just recycle that stuff. It'll probably mean throwing more stuff out than you're used to. But if you are mixing the wrong kinds of recycling together, like out of wishful thinking, then you're actually doing more harm than good, because that stuff is going to end up either in the landfill or, you know, in the worst case, like in the landfill, in a shitty landfill in a third world country. But like, if you can figure out that, like, suppose you figure out that like it's pretty reliable in your neighborhood, like, because the different neighborhoods are able to recycle different things, like they have different infrastructure to do different things. But say in your neighborhood you realize like, okay, recycling glass bottles and aluminum cans and Amazon boxes, like you can be pretty confident that will end up where it's supposed to go. Like just recycle those things and then just throw everything else out. And especially don't recycle, like, people stop recycling things that have like food on them and stuff.
Yeah.
Like your peanut butter jars, like stop trying to wash those out because there's still a bunch of wax on them. That shit's just ending up in the landfill. Like, and like coffee, like Starbucks coffee cups, you can't recycle that because they have wax on them. Like none of that is recyclable, and that's just throw that out.
Yeah. Another one is pizza boxes with any grease on it at all. If there's like a couple droplets of grease, it ruins the entire paper recycling mulch process. Like you can't.
Yeah, exactly.
Paper. Yeah.
And you're probably not going to take the time to cut out the grease patches, so just throw it out. Like, I
think where I'm currently at is so excellent point that I need to look into the regional, like what's actually happening. But I think where I'm basically at is be very diligent with recycling aluminums and metals and like electronic waste, but then plastics and like paper cups with any sort of wax on it, or just most paper. I just garbage it now, and I don't feel too bad. I feel still a little bit bad because I've been so indoctrinated into this. Like, so I feel like the pro recycling push started like roughly when we were kids, right? Do you remember like learning?
Yeah, it was the 90s.
Yeah. So like it would have been when we were just young, and it's like the data is in now, and we know what works and what doesn't work. But no, that actually helps to resolve it. Yeah, so I will look into my regional recycling facilities. But I just don't want like my plastic that I'm recycling to just be some Indonesian's problem.
I know, exactly.
I would much rather just have it in our garbage, our landfill, and not just be shipped across the world. And now would be dealing with some place in a developing country.
The thing I'm going to struggle with now, I think, is in public places like airports, where there's often a couple bins for different kind. They'll have a trash bin, then they'll have a paper bin, etc. And I want to think that that's being done properly, but I doubt it, mainly because probably people in the airport are just fucking up and putting random stuff in there. Yeah. And so if you assume that, so either the airport actually doesn't care and they're just putting it all in the trash, which is possible and probably would be better, to be honest. And so I kind of hope they're just doing that. But the question is like, because now there's this weird public perception thing of like, say you have a coffee cup and you shouldn't recycle it. Exactly. And you're looking around you and people are like, people are watching you and you just, there's a coffee cup bin in front of you and there's a landfill bin. You're just like, I should be throwing this in the landfill bin.
Dude, that's what I meant with the N-word comparison. It's if you just throw your plastic out in the garbage.
You're on a date and like you throw, I know.
Dude, I would just go along with whatever the norms are of the people that I'm with. Like,
sorry, Filipinos. I need to. My dates have to go well. I can't be getting in an argument about recycling on the first date. That's at least fourth date kind of material.
Oh my god, yeah. Just opening up the date with like, let's talk about the benefits of landfills.
I love me a good landfill.
Well, cool, man. Any last points on your side? I feel like it's fun dipping into territory that we don't often touch. It's
it was great. Now I have another thing on the list that I have strong opinions about, that it's going to make me more annoying when it comes up at some public function. I'm like, fuck, am I going to say anything? What do I do? What do I do here?
Awesome, man. Well, I don't know what we're talking about next time, but this was a blast. And it's just fun dipping into environmental stuff every so often. Yeah,
it was good. Go read Robert Wiblin's piece. It's good and much more succinct than our ramblings.
That's probably enough. He has a lot of excellent references at the end. So that's one of the reasons I thought it was such a great piece. And then we'll link to some of the other resources that we've used. I don't know if we named all of them, but Václav Smil and Michael Schellenberger are both great, but you've heard me talk about those names before because I love those authors. Cool, man. This was fun. Nice. And chat soon.